on a Saturday to collect the money. Those were the days. Very nice to have you on the show, Kimberly. Well, kia ora. Speak to you again. So, yes, did you do a paper run? Paper run's a contract, it's not employment, but do you have to be 18 to commit to a contract? So that, what was it, an Auckland 7, Gary, was it?
Yeah, they were cheaper in those days.
Yes, I can imagine.
But I just think, though, that it's sort of the ethos of work, it's the responsibility, and I must say that my boss, Wally Harris in Palmerston North, used to let me drive his Ford 10 van and we'd deliver the papers, and that to me was the bonus for me, to drive this dreadful old van. But no, I think it's great that kids can have all sorts of jobs to teach them the ethos and the beauty of work.
The love of a local paper run, eh? Very good. All right, Gary Moore, Catherine Brown, kia ora to you both. Lovely to have you both.
Thank you.
I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow at 10:45. Checkpoint is next.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei, a potential lifeline for cancer patients. National unveils its plan to fund 13 new treatments, meaning some Kiwis won't have to jump the ditch or start a Give a Little page. Meanwhile, senior doctors and dentists have voted to walk off the job. So what does that mean for patients? A 300% plus jump in assaults and thefts sees one supermarket pumping tens of millions of dollars into security. It's choppy waters for Fuller's Ferries in Auckland Transport, with commuters caught in the middle, and Labour plans to teach teachers how to teach. And the Little Stars being helped by a new centre for children with disabilities.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. Senior doctors and dentists working in hospitals are set to strike next month over their deadlocked pay negotiations. The Association of Salaried Medical Specialists says more than 80% have voted for 3 strikes. The union's executive director, Sarah Dalton, says since 2020, senior clinicians have had either no pay rise or pay rises that lag behind inflation.
Our members have said there needs to be at the minimum a CPI adjustment. They can't continue with real pay cuts given how short-staffed they are, how difficult the work is and how hard it is to recruit senior doctors and dentists.
The strikes will be for 2 hours on September the 5th and the 13th and 4 hours on September the 21st. National says it wants to raise the bar on how cancer is treated by funding 13 new cancer treatments that are extending survival rates in Australia. It says the medicines would be paid for by limiting the Labour government's free pharmacy scripts policy to those on low incomes and superannuitants. Health spokesperson Shane Reti says it's a small change that could make a big difference.
We're very excited for this announcement. We want to work with clinicians. We want to raise the bar on what we do with cancer, and we think benchmarking ourselves to Australia in this instance, first of all, is a very, very good starting place.
But Labour leader Chris Hipkins says more cancer treatments shouldn't come at the expense of universal free pharmacy prescriptions. Mr Hipkins says it's not an either-or situation and called it a smoke and mirrors policy by National. Disgraced philanthropist James Wallace has been stripped of his knighthood. Wallace was named in June as the prominent businessman who was jailed for sexually abusing 3 young men. Chris Hipkins says he's no longer a knight.
I've had formal notification from King Charles that he has approved the cancellation of James Wallace's knighthood. I've written to James Wallace to advise him accordingly. The government formally requested that the King cancel Mr Wallace's appointment as a Knight Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit back in June.
James Wallace can no longer use the title Sir or KNZM and has been asked to return his warrant of appointment and honours insignia. The judge overseeing the retrial of David Benbow on a charge of murdering his childhood friend Michael McGrath says new evidence will be presented in the trial, which got underway today. The jury at the first trial of Mr Benbow in February this year was unable to reach a verdict. In the High Court in Christchurch today, Justice Jonathan Eaton told the jury there had been extensive media coverage of the case, but they must only consider evidence presented to them in court. A decision to mandate the way teachers teach reading, writing and maths is worrying the Secondary Teachers Union. The government's announced its so-called common practice model for teaching the subjects will be compulsory from 2026. The union's acting president, Chris Abercrombie, says politicians should not be telling teachers how to do their job. State Highway 35 on the east coast has reopened, but with only one lane. The highway east of Auckland was closed after heavy rain brought down trees and other debris last night. Auckland drivers will be paying more for parking from next week. Prices will rise by $1 for both on-street parking and in all Auckland Transport managed car parks. And a memorial service has been held today for the last surviving crewman of the famed Second World War New Zealand cruiser Achilles. Grattan Ling, who was 102, served on the Achilles from 1945 to 46. Rear Admiral David Proctor says it is part of the end of an era.
And certainly the last of the World War II vets and even the Korean vets are passing at this point in time.
The Achilles earlier took part in the Battle of the River Plate in the South Atlantic in 1939, the first Allied naval victory of the war. In sport, pole vaulter Eliza McCartney is about to compete in her first World Championships in 6 years in Hungary tonight. The Rio Olympic bronze medalist has been plagued by injuries but has stormed back in 2023 with her third best ever height and an Olympic qualifying standard. McCartney says she has to make the most of every moment.
I think I really am just thinking happy thoughts and honestly just wanting to enjoy it, because if I get too caught up in everything that's going on, I don't tend to jump well and it tends to bring me down a bit. So honestly, I think I'll be lining up there and just taking it in and just enjoying the moment, the fact that I get to be here again and do this.
Olivia McTaggart and Imogen Eris are also in pole vault qualifying tonight, while sprinter Zoe Hobbs will attempt to qualify for the final of the 100 metres. The All Blacks forwards coach Jason Ryan says their unbeaten season will count for little come the World Cup happening later this year, and says there is plenty of room for improvement. The All Blacks take on South Africa in their final warm-up game at Twickenham on Saturday, and despite concerns about injuries so close to the World Cup, Ryan says they'll be picking their strongest side.
The season to date is irrelevant now. The Rugby Championship with Bledisloe, it's nothing more than a good memory, really. This World Cup, we've got to keep evolving our game. Tradition shows that the team that evolves their game the most will hold the trophy up. I think there's some good areas around our breakdown we can keep working on, and defensively we're making some good progress as well.
And 19-year-old shooter Amelia Wormsley has been named in the 2023-2024 Silver Fern squad. And that's the news.
Labor and National both back financial literacy in schools.
How do you find the time and the curriculum to do this? We know what teachers need. We know what's going to make a difference.
Wildfires rage across Canada.
I can actually smell the smoke where I am right now, which is suburban Vancouver.
And the party's over. Spain take out the FIFA Women's World Cup.
Here they are, world champions. A new name is now etched on that World Cup trophy.
The show goes on here. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight Tuesday, tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, including the Coromandel. Showers, some heavy with hail, clearing this evening. Fine tomorrow. Southwesterly gales easing this evening. Waitomo to Manawatu. Also Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Showers, some heavy with hail in the west. Showers becoming isolated this evening and clearing north of Taihape, becoming fine tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, including Horowhenua to Wellington. Showers, some heavy with hail today. Showers about the east coast, but fine elsewhere tomorrow. Southerly gales in exposed places, easing tomorrow. Marlborough, excluding the Kaikoura coast, Nelson and Buller to Fiordland, mainly fine, cloud and drizzle developing in Fiordland tomorrow evening. For the Kaikoura coast and Canterbury, fine apart from isolated showers north of Christchurch today. Otago and Southland, a few showers becoming fine this evening. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional rain. RNZ National, it is coming up to 5:08 and you're with Checkpoint and Lisa Owen.
Nā mihi ana, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai, ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā. The government is taking the highly unusual step of ordering teachers how to teach. From 2026, teachers must use government-approved methods for teaching, reading, writing and maths. It's part of what it calls the Common Practice Model, which it has been working on since last year in an effort to improve children's literacy and numeracy. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen and video journalist Angus Drever have the story.
The Education Minister back in the classroom. Jan Tinetti's a former principal back at school to announce some big changes. Teachers knew the so-called Common Practice Model was coming, but they didn't know it would be compulsory. Announcing the move at Johnsonville School in Wellington today, Jan Tinetti chose her words carefully.
We're going to make all of the learning be, what's the way that I would put this? Very similar across the country.
Jan Tinetti says a mandatory model will ensure the same principles underpin teachers' work no matter where they are in the country. But it's slated to go much further than that. It will lay out teaching methods and phase-by-phase guidance for teaching reading, writing and maths. The acting president of the Post-Primary Teachers Association, Chris Abercrombie, says that's not how New Zealand schools work.
It's really unusual in the New Zealand context. There's no other aspect of our curriculum where this is dealt with in this way. So it is really unusual. We know this happens in overseas jurisdictions, but it's very unusual to be told how to teach something. You know, what to teach, that's always there in the curriculum, but the how to do it is really unusual.
He says a compulsory system will make it harder for teachers to innovate for students who need something different. Felicity Fahey, a teacher who's been helping develop the model, says compulsion is needed.
Well, I think there's pros and cons for it, and it's a necessary thing at the moment. So we want to make sure that the teachers understand the importance of this common practice model. It's not a pick and mix of do what you want. This is the best way, the evidence is showing that we need to teach our children.
The president of the Educational Institute, Mark Potter, says the union supports the model, but he warns it won't work if it's too detailed and prescriptive.
What will determine how teachers respond to this is how much it infringes on their professional autonomy. So teachers are always up for and love to see ideas and ways of teaching. They're always looking for that. But what they're not keen on, and it does not work, is being told what to do, when to do it, how to do it in their school, their classroom.
Mark Potter says he's not sure the model needs to be mandatory, but there does need to be more consistency between schools. Principals Federation President Leanne Ortini says telling teachers how to teach is unusual, but teachers will be on board because they've helped create the Common Practice Model.
Yes, this is different but what I will say is that we've been working very closely with the Ministry of Education. That is different, and we need to continue to do this. Let me be clear, this is not national standards. We would never support anything whereby every child was to reach a certain level by a certain age.
The Common Practice Model will be unveiled sometime in Term 4, and schools will be able to use it from next year. The government says teacher appraisals and Education Review Office audits will check that teachers and schools are using it.
John Gerritsen reporting there, and if you're listening on radio, the video version of that story will be on our web page. National's promising a potential lifeline for some cancer patients if it's in government. The party says it will pay for 13 cancer treatments that are already helping extend survival rates in Australia. The Cancer Control Agency recently identified the treatments for lung, bowel, kidney and head and neck cancers that it says provide significant clinical benefits and are funded in Australia but not here in New Zealand. National's pledging $280 million in ring-fenced funding over 4 years to pay for the therapies. The money will come from limiting the government's policy of free prescriptions for all to just pensioners and people with community services cards. Well, joining us now is National's health spokesperson, Dr. Shane Reti. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Lisa. Good to speak with you. And you've missed one condition off that list, that's melanoma.
Okay, melanoma too. Tell me, how many lives do you think will be saved with these extra treatments?
So the indications we have is that there'll be roughly 1,000 a year who would benefit from these treatments. Clearly, with these sort of conditions, some are curative, and that's why I mentioned melanoma, because the Cancer Control Agency identified 2 of these 13 cancer treatments as actually being curative, and the others are life-enabling. They enable quality of life while cancer is progressing or somewhat stable. So what we know is that it'll be roughly 1,000 each year.
Is there any data on how many patients are heading offshore to Australia to get this treatment?
Only anecdotal. We only anecdotally know, and we saw some indication of that through the Therapeutic Products Bill, where it looked like the government was going to stop people from certainly bringing more cheaper chemotherapeutics in from offshore. And we had a number of submissions from people in that particular instance, which is similar to actually going to bringing it in, if you like, because we don't fund it. So only anecdotal, not good numbers, Lisa.
So the funding of this, $280 million, explain exactly where the money is coming from.
So when the government announced that they would remove the copay for everyone, that was at a net cost of $600 million. We believe that should be targeted. It is hard to justify that the wealthiest New Zealanders should receive exactly the same copay relief as those who are more vulnerable. And so we believe those that are more vulnerable are those with community services cards and those who are Super Gold card holders. So we'll target that policy towards that. When we do that, it comes at a cost of $300 million. That leaves $300 million for proposals like this, for policies like this, where we can save lives.
Some pensioners, they can afford to pay the co-payment, right? So if you're targeting it on means, you could have more money for cancer treatments if you only gave the free prescriptions to pensioners who actually need it.
What we know is that generally as people get older, they add more medications to their list of requirements. And so we want to address that need in older people. So they are a vulnerable group.
The Cancer Society's medical director, Dr. Kate Gregory, she has cautioned that this package would need to include funding for the associated infrastructure, she says, to administer treatments. And by that she means staff and space. So what resources have you got going into that?
Oh, she's absolutely right. Looking at the downstream impacts of a policy like this is really important. And probably the pinch point is the infusion capability. That is, when you have a chemotherapeutic, you're in a chemo suite and you have a giving set and you have a chemo nurse in a special facility, sterile environment. So all of that is really important infrastructure. And we've talked about that through some of our policies around a health workforce, and we'll have more to say on that. For this particular announcement, I would point out that 50% of the preparations are actually taken orally at home.
Okay,
so we don't see what we're announcing today as having impact on that. But her wider point is well made.
Yeah, and on that point, are you giving assurances today that there will be the infrastructure and the facilities, because it's all very well funding the treatments, but if you can't give them to patients, it means nothing. So are you giving a complete assurance today that the infrastructure will be there so that these 13 treatments that you have identified will be given?
With the information that we have in front of us today, we have confidence that these medicines will be able to be given. And as I said, particularly the announcement we've made today, 50% of them are oral and taken at home.
And we're almost out of time, but you're going to restore health targets for treatment times. What will they be for cancer, please?
31 day. We've had discussions with the Cancer Society, and we agree that the 31 faster cancer treatment target is the most appropriate. That's the target that we'll pin ourselves on.
Thank you for your time. That is Dr. Shane Retty, who is National's health spokesperson there. It is 16 minutes after 5. Kia mau tuna mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And sticking with health, senior doctors have voted to walk off the job around the country next month after a breakdown in pay talks. The Association of Salaried Medical Specialists says 80% of its members have voted to strike, arguing when inflation is taken into account, Te Whatu Ora is essentially wanting them to take a pay cut for the third year in a row. The 3 strikes will last 2 to 4 hours on September the 5th, 13th and 21st. Now, joining me now is the Executive Director of the Association of Salaried Medical Specialists, Sarah Dalton. Kia ora, Sarah.
Kia ora, Lisa.
How far apart are you?
On paper, we're not a long way apart, but Te Whatu Ora is refusing to offer effectively a CPI adjustment to our members this year.
So what are you asking for? What kind of percentage pay rise?
So depending what step of the salary scale a specialist is on, they would be looking at 6 to 8%.
And what would that bring your average salary to?
Oh, I couldn't tell you average salaries, but a senior doctor starting out starts on about $170,000 a year.
Okay, and you think that's reasonable to be asking for 6 to 8%?
We think a CPI adjustment is a reasonable thing to ask. Senior doctors and dentists have had year-on-year real pay cuts since 2020, and we have massive recruitment and retention issues. We import nearly 50% of our senior medical and dental workforce, and people are voting with their feet and not coming to New Zealand anymore.
The government has indicated that money is tight. It can't afford big promises. Do you think it's realistic? What would that take the entire pay bill to in terms of an increase?
Well, I think the government have got it the wrong way round. I mean, I don't think we should see senior medical and dental workforce as a luxury. I would have thought that was a basic necessity in a country like ours.
How many patients is this going to affect?
It's hard for me to know, but obviously life-preserving services are maintained during any strike action. The first one is effectively through what you might call a long lunch, if our members had lunchtime, so 12 till 2. But there will be an impact. It's not something that our members do lightly, but we are at the end of our rope in terms of what can we do next to try and influence Te Whatu Ora to do more than talk about vacancies, to do more than talk about retention and recruitment. They have offered nothing to address any of those things since before COVID.
So I know you describe it what would potentially be a long lunch, but between those hours, what are we talking about in terms of surgeries? What kind of procedures?
The only thing that happens during strike action are what are known as life-preserving services, so something to ensure that there will be no loss of limb or loss of life. So that's all that would happen during those hours.
Yeah, so that means what? That anyone who is getting a hip done or a knee, they're off the surgical roster?
That's right.
And what other things?
So planned clinics, planned care, any kind of non-urgent procedures wouldn't take place at those times.
Presumably then you're talking about tens of thousands of patients.
Potentially, I imagine that is the case. Yep.
And so what do you say to them? Because some of them would have waited ages, right, Sarah? Because the system is slammed. They would have been waiting, some of them, months and months.
Yeah, and I would echo the sentiments of our members, which we are really sorry that this is happening. We are really sorry this has come to this. We're also really sorry that there are many thousands of people every day that can't be seen, and when they are seen, I had a note from a member the other day saying, I'm sick of seeing a patient and saying you need an operation and I can't give it to you, because that is the state of our health system right now. So we're really sorry some more people are going to miss out should those strikes take place, but we can't let this go on.
So what chance is there that this will be called off?
That's in the hands of the employer at this point. So if Te Whatu Ora wants to come back to the table, offer a CPI adjustment in a 12-month term, we can get on with things and we can keep moving.
Thanks for your time, Sarah. That is Sarah Dalton from the Association of Salaried Medical Specialists there. 21 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, do send us your feedback. There's two big health stories today. National is promising to fund 13 new cancer treatments that they say are already helping extend survival rates in Australia. That'd be available here in New Zealand. And you just heard there, the salaried medical specialists have voted to go on strike, 80% of their membership. There'll be 3 strikes next month, which means if you're on the list for anything other than life-preserving surgery, you will miss out until a later date. Let us know your thoughts on that one. You can get in touch via text 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for us to go to the headlines. Anea Anna, mena pita pita kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. The government is to oversee the way reading, writing and maths are taught from 2026 in an effort to improve results. Education Minister Jan Tinetti says a mandatory common practice model will underpin all teachers' work. But the Post-Primary Teachers Association fears the policy will make it harder to help those who need something different. National says if it gets into government, it wants to bring in 13 cancer treatments that are already being used in Australia. The party's promising to fund the policy at a cost of $280 million over 4 years by limiting Labour's free prescriptions to pensioners and community service card holders. National's health spokesperson Dr Shane Reti told Checkpoint about 1,000 people a year would benefit. Senior hospital doctors and dentists have voted to strike next month in their dispute over pay. Association of Salaried Medical Specialist members will walk out for 2 hours on September the 5th and 13th and for 4 hours on September the 21st. Philanthropist James Wallace has been stripped of his knighthood after being named as the prominent businessman who sexually abused 3 young men. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says it is totally inappropriate for Mr Wallace to hold the honour, and King Charles has now approved its cancellation. And Spanish footballer Olga Carmona, whose goal gave her Women's World Cup side a 1-0 victory over England's Lionesses in Sydney, has paid tribute to her father, who died on Friday. Ms Carmona was not told about his death until after the final. Those are the headlines, and just a transport roading notice for you. State Highway 2 remains down to 1 southbound lane at a crash site prior to Nauronga, so that's near Wellington. Continue to expect delays southbound as congestion is heavy between Dow's Interchange and Nauronga Gorge. Those are the headlines, Lisa.
Thank you, Anna. Spain are the Women's World Cup champions and have sent their nation's football fans into raptures. However, after the action on the field, there has been a few less joyous moments for members of Spain's champion team. We're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. OK, Felicity, so what has happened since Spain lifted the trophy?
Yes, as we were just hearing there, the captain Olga Carmona, the joy of scoring the only goal in the World Cup final and being named as player of the tournament. She then was followed with that sad news of her father's passing. She wasn't told by her friends and family. Her family were actually in New Zealand during Spain's tournament here, had gone back to Spain, then flown to Australia to be there for the final, and had decided to kind of keep that news from her, wanting her to play in that game and I guess give her best as well. So it was after the game that she found out, and after the game that everybody else found out, when Spain put that information out on social media as well. And they actually, during the game when she scored her goal, she'd actually lifted up her shirt and it said Muchi underneath, which she was actually saying at the time when she was asked was actually a tribute to a friend's motherhood past. So it's obviously a time for celebration and plenty of commemoration for Olga Carmona and at this World Tournament. But also in a separate situation that played out not long after the final whistle. It was actually during the after-match presentation as all the players go and get their trophy and their players' winners' medal or losers' medals. And they actually were going up onto the stage, and this is past a whole line of officials. So it's including the FIFA president, Gianni Infantino, and it's also the Spanish FA president who was up there as well. So he sparked a bit of controversy though. So as Spain's all-time leading goal scorer, Jenny Hermoso, was going up to get her medal, she had to pass past these people, and the Spanish president, FIFA, their president there, he grabbed her, picked her up, grabbed her head, kissed her on the lips and put her down. So she afterwards said that had made her feel very uncomfortable. She did not like that. And I guess rightfully so, football journalists and people on social media have actually seen that footage and called it out as well.
Yeah, it was a bit icky if you've seen any of the footage. Let's move on to All Blacks. Former All Black Aaron Major wants to see changes in the way rugby is played here in New Zealand. What is he suggesting? Yeah, so not long ago, New Zealand Rugby CEO Mark Robinson said that the NPC, the National Provincial Competition, was not for purpose. So that sparked a few ructions amongst different people in the rugby community, and that's actually sparked some discussion. So as part of that, Aaron Major, a former All Black and Canterbury rugby player, is saying that the way that he wants to see this rejigged domestic competition, he wants to see the NPC and Super Rugby run side by side. So in order to achieve that, you'd be swapping the local club season with the NPC season to allow these two, I guess, top-tier competitions to run side by side. It would give a broader player pool a base, could keep some of these players that normally go overseas during this time, when they would normally be playing, say, during the club season, which would become the NPC season. It would allow that player base so that if you weren't selected for your Super Rugby team that week, you'd be heading along to the NPC side. So you'd be getting some higher level competition. It would give this player base to these people, so
I mean, Aaron Major's been a Super Rugby coach. He was just with Moana Pacifica, and he had these players who were injured. So the players that he wanted to call on weren't available to him. So by having this bigger group, he'd be able to call them up, and it would be keeping what he was describing around 200 players in the country to be performing at this level. But as he stepped away from the Super Rugby role that he's had, and he's been watching his kids play rugby and at their club rugby games, he's been on the sidelines here, and it's actually watching club rugby that's inspired his approach.
Imagine Richie Mo'unga if he wasn't playing for the All Blacks this time of year, going back to Linwood Rugby and rubbing shoulders with young guys first year out of school playing club footy would just be awesome for the game, and also for the young kids coming through the club to see their hero in their club jersey. It's inspiring, and it makes the dream possible for those young ones. I think we've probably lost a little bit of that touch with the grassroots. So, putting our best players around club players, passing on the knowledge, reinvesting back in the game at that level would be a huge benefit.
And it's all of that connection that he wants to keep going as well, and he sees that as the benefit for the future of the All Blacks as well.
Thank you, Felicity. That's our sports reporter, Felicity Reid. One of the country's major supermarket chains is investing $45 million in security measures after a jump of more than 300% in physical assaults and thefts over the past 6 years. Woolworths New Zealand, formerly Countdown, says it's seen a significant increase in aggressive, threatening and brazen behaviour by offenders, with a rise in shoplifting and retail crime. In the same period, security incidents have increased more than 800%. Now, the security rollout includes trolley lock systems and new camera technology at self-checkouts. Joining us now is Woolworths New Zealand Head of Safety, Health and Wellbeing, Denver Wren. Hi, Denver. What sort of incidents are you talking about here?
Oh, kia ora, Lisa. Thank you for having us. Look, our team at the front line are really experiencing a mix of aggressive behaviour, whether that is verbal, physical conflict, concealed weapons being presented, and some even more serious threats occurring across our stores.
When you say concealed weapons, what things have you seen?
Anything from knives, quite common, but tire irons, anything that people can get their hands on. It's amazing what people maybe pull out of their pocket or bags, right through to handguns, to be fair. Whether they are real or not, we have to take those threats seriously.
And so is this people who are doing a runner with groceries, walking out the front door with the trolley loaded up?
Well, I think there's a mix actually occurring in our stores. We don't necessarily see everybody just trying to make a runner. Like, people in the current environment are really struggling with the cost of living and inflationary pressure, and so, they may feel that they have a right, or actually that they necessarily really need to actually steal. But actually, we're trying to equip our teams to make sure that they make informed decisions on whether it's safe to approach and how they approach. And this is where we're actually then seeing offenders respond. And we would have said in the past it was customer conflict. I wouldn't even necessarily say some of these people are actually customers in our stores. They are offenders, or we have a theft problem across our nation, and retailers are really feeling that, not just supermarket retailers.
What are people pinching?
Oh, there probably is, what a family needs. But if you think about the high cost of meat, if you think about even confectionery items that may end up in other parts of a retail network, right through to health and beauty, but really anything in a supermarket that could be desirable is being stolen.
You raise the cost of living there, and there's no justification for threatening your staff or walking out with stuff that you haven't paid for. But given the profits that have been outlined in supermarkets, what efforts are you making to ensure that groceries are affordable?
Look, this is a really big challenge for every single household around cost of living and the cost of groceries. We're really very mindful of that and trying to keep prices as low as they can be. But this is so significant. We are investing $45 million over the next 3 years in a mixture of security measures to try and actually make sure our stores are safer for our team and safer for customers, safer for our communities. And if we can land that well and make sure that we can actually prevent some of this offending and theft, but also the brazen behaviour and aggression towards our team, then it's going to be much better. And it will be better not only for our team and our customers, but actually we'll be able to try and keep prices lower for longer.
Okay, so the trolley locks, explain what they do, and is that because people are just wheeling them out without paying?
Yeah, this is very smart technology and we're very, very excited about it. So this is smart technology on trolleys that will recognise when a trolley enters a store, when it exits the store, and if you have not stopped for long enough to go through a checkout and to pay for those goods, then it will know and it'll stop. And so the best part about it is it'll stop, and those people that potentially are stealing or pushing out a full grocery trolley load, none of our team have necessarily had to intervene and put themselves at risk to stop that trolley. So in many instances, people just walk away, which is fantastic. We're really excited about that.
Given that you are investing so much money in this must be becoming increasingly common. How often do you see people wander off with a trolley full of goodies that they haven't bothered to pay for?
It's a common occurrence. It is a common occurrence. It's very, very sad. Yeah, in some stores it would be daily, multiple times a day, in really hotspot stores. It's very, very hard for our team to be able to see this happen in front of their eyes when they're working very, very hard to make an honest living.
When you say hotspot stores, which are your worst?
Oh, we've had risk assessed across the whole country. So we've been looking to see what controls are needed most in what areas, and we're working on that. But that's, we're focusing on delivery security measures that are going to make a real difference in our communities. And I probably don't want to go into those details of exactly which stores, but they would be those areas that you would expect them to be.
I'm not sure which areas would they be. Can you just give me a general geographic guideline? Where are the ones that need the most security measures?
You've probably heard from retailers and even the police that areas like Auckland, the Waikato, even Christchurch, some of our major centres are having some real challenges.
Tell me about these cameras at the self-checkout. What are people doing to kind of, I suppose, scam you, rip off the supermarket? How do they do it at the self-checkout other than just not scanning the item?
Well, I think this technology actually really assists our customer services team to be able to make sure they have a really great conversation with our customers when they are scanning at the checkout, and to make sure everything's been scanned.
Thanks for your time, Denver. That is Denver Wren, who is from Woolworths New Zealand. They're investing $45 million in security measures over the next 3 years. It is 26 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tōne mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa NINA, ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins me in the studio to talk about business. A2 Milk, Nona, a net profit is up, but warnings of tougher times ahead. Is this because of the China market?
Very well done, Lisa. You've been paying attention all this time.
Listen to your every word,
Oh, my
Nona.
goodness, I had no idea. Well, yes, you're right. I mean, yes. Their net profit rose 26% to $155.6 million. That was a pretty good result. However, the outlook's not so good. In the last year, their infant formula business in China fell 14%, and they're expecting single-digit growth in the year ahead. So that didn't go down well with the market. The share price fell 13%. That's not great. So tough times for A2 Milk, but I guess that's not really that surprising given the Chinese economy at the moment.
And let's talk about Freightways. They've also made a profit, but mostly because of its Australian business.
Yeah, so they bought a big business last year in Australia called Allied Express. It accounted for 143% growth in revenue, and was a good reason why the company turned a profit. It's 7% increase to $75.3 million. And they said that the weakness in the New Zealand economy was offset by what was going on in Australia. So in New Zealand, there was a lot of weakness still with, I guess, just a hangover from COVID still, the tight labor market and so on. Although Freightways thought that the labor market conditions were changing in Australia as well as in New Zealand, so that was easing off. Overall, the company is seeing an easier ride really in Australia. They're going to be listing on the Australian Stock Exchange, a second listing. So their primary will still be New Zealand. They're going to have a secondary listing on the ASX from the middle of September, if all T's are crossed and I's dotted.
And speaking of said market, Nona, what numbers have you got,
Well, I just want to say that The NZX Top 50 Index has really had a hard time today. It's one of the biggest falls we've seen for a while, a drop of 1.3%. That's 153 points down to 11,459. So we haven't been at that level for a while. And that's really in line with what we're seeing in Asia after China delivered less stimulus to the economy than the market was expecting, quite a lot less. And the New Zealand dollar, well, it was still a little changed even though, trading at 59.3 US cents, 92.4 Australian and 46.5 British pence.
Wowza.
I know, it's
the
really
downward
good.
slide continues.
It certainly does.
Okay, thank you, Nona. Ka kite. That's Nona Peltier with business news there. A state of emergency has been declared in British Columbia and a ban on non-essential travel has been put in place as hundreds of fires rage. Canada is enduring its worst wildfire season in history. Tens of thousands of people have been evacuated from the province as firefighters warn the next few days will be difficult. Here is the BBC's Wyra Davies.
Oh my God.
There are more than 1,000 wildfires raging throughout Canada. Desperate scenes in parts of the country as homes and livelihoods are consumed by the advancing fires. There's particular concern in the western province of British Columbia, where 30,000 residents have been ordered to leave their homes. Even more have been told to be ready to evacuate at any moment. The town of Kelowna, to the east of Vancouver, is being threatened by an advancing inferno. The nearby lake, no barrier to fire, as strong winds carry embers across the water, setting fire to homes and buildings on the other side. Don't travel to the region is the advice from the local authorities.
At this time, we are strongly recommending that people with plans to travel to fire-affected areas throughout the central interior and southeast in the coming days to cancel those plans. We need tourists and travelers to take this situation as seriously as the residents of these areas do.
Further north, the town of Yellowknife has been completely evacuated, 20,000 people leaving in just 2 days. A huge effort, and some spoke of the devastation they'd driven through to escape.
When we are driving, both of the highway side, it's burned down so that it's all trees are black. I think it's the internet line or fiber lines, poles are down, and we still see smokes coming out.
With more gusty winds forecast, towns across the region are still under threat. And in a country well prepared for dealing with forest fires, resources are stretched to the limit. Specialist firefighters from overseas are arriving to help. And for those who can't move freely, the Canadian Air Force is airlifting people to safety. As officials urged residents in areas under threat to take immediate action to save their own lives, the Canadian government said it was sending in the armed forces to help deal with the crisis.
It is 20 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A lot of your feedback is coming in, so let's get to some of it. This is on National's policy. They would fund 13 new cancer treatments that they say evidence shows they're in use over in Australia and that they are benefiting patients. And they would do that, fund it, by ditching free prescriptions for everybody. It would be targeted. You've got to have a community services card or a gold card. Kate says, why are wealthy people over 65 still entitled to free medicines under National's policy? It is not logical, as many of the over 65-year-olds are mortgage-free and living the life of Riley, says Kate. Another listener says, great idea from National re cancer treatments. New Zealand is so far behind with cancer drugs and treatments. Another in the same vein as Kate, why does National think it's fair that pensioners with millions in assets get free prescriptions and other Kiwis don't? We need to collect more tax from the super wealthy, this listener says, and reinvigorate our overstretched health system. Someone needs to have the courage to do this. Joe has got in touch and says, so approximately 1,000 people would benefit from the cancer drugs. That's right. And the cost is about $70 million a year over 4 years, rather than thousands who would benefit from the payments, having no co-payments, the few benefiting at the expense of many. Good right-wing policies. Interested in your thoughts on that that one because it works out at about $70,000 a patient a year. And I'm sure if it's a relative of yours, you think that's money well spent. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz and the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for us to go to the headlines. Anna, mina pita kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says he wants to see senior doctors return to the bargaining table soon. Senior hospital doctors and dentists in the Association of Salaried Medical Specialists have voted to strike for several hours 3 times next month over their deadlocked pay negotiations. The union's executive director, Sarah Dalton, says senior clinicians have had either no pay rise at all since 2020 or pay rises that lag behind inflation. The government is to cut levels of nicotine in vapes from September the 21st as part of its attempt to curb youth vaping. Health Minister Dr Aisha Verrall says the levels will balance the need for vapes to be an effective smoking cessation device while also limiting the risk of nicotine addiction. British nurse Lucy Letby is due to be sentenced later for the murders of 7 babies. The 33-year-old was also convicted of trying to kill 6 other infants at the Countess of Chester Hospital. A Ukrainian drone has crashed into the roof of a railway station in the western Russian city of Kursk, injuring 5 people. Russia's Kursk region borders Ukraine and has been the target of previous attacks. And parts of Death Valley on the northern side of the Mojave Desert have been flooded by intense rainfall from Tropical Storm Hillary. The Californian desert, one of the hottest places on Earth, could receive 2 years' worth of rainfall from this one weather event alone. And just one traffic notice, just in case you missed the news earlier, that State Highway 35 is open again. That's Opotiki to Te Aroha, or Te Aroa rather, not Te Aroha, Te Aroa. And so it is open again, both directions via one lane. So follow the posted give-way system. And that was after a slip occurred between Beach Road and Motu River Bridge. Those are the headlines. Lisa.
Thank you, Anna. A quiz team that dressed like members of the murderous white American extremist group, the Ku Klux Klan, has apologised to event organisers for its poor judgment in perpetuating racism and reinforcing harmful stereotypes. The team dressed in the distinctive KKK-like robes and hoods with cutouts for eyes when they turned up at Saturday's event organised by the Kaimai Settlers Committee in the small Bay of Plenty town. The organisers say they deplore the behaviour of the team and regret not asking them to remove their costumes or leave. Since the event, the committee says it's received an apology from the team that says it is deeply ashamed and embarrassed by its poor judgment and a lack of awareness for the gravity of the situation. The apology also refers to the consumption of alcohol and impaired judgment. Bari Mikaere is a former director of the Waitangi Tribunal, a tauranga historian and iwi leader who was also raised in Kaimai, and he joins me now. Tēnā koe.
Oh, kia ora, Lisa.
Bari, what do you think of this behaviour?
Oh, it's all good to be very sorry in retrospect, but, I was really ashamed and actually disgusted that this kind of thing is happening in our country, and especially in a community like Kaimai, where I do have links going back to my childhood. In those days it was a very strong Māori community, and so to have this happening now, I mean, where's that community gone to that they would actually promulgate stuff like this? It's a shocker.
Buddy, I'm not asking you to name them, but I know you do have local connections. So do you know anything about the people who wore the costumes, like what kind of age they are?
Well, I'm just assuming that they were young people. That's just going on some of the publicity that I've seen. I think they're quite right when they say that they didn't fully appreciate what they were doing. But again, I find that quite surprising. I would have expected it to be coming from an older group of people. But I thought that our education system, our community values were much different with the younger generation, but looks like I'm going to be disappointed.
Buddy, can you imagine that someone does not know what the KKK is?
I really can't. So that is just beyond me. I've just come back from the States, actually. I spent quite a bit of time in the Deep South, in Alabama. Actually met some Ku Klux members, and had some interesting discussions with them. They say that they prey is probably the wrong word they used, but that they target people who are anxious, worried, about what's happening in the country, while all the black people taking over. If it's not black people, it's Mexicans, all that kind of thing. And the only way to deal with it is to get a gun. So, that's the end way of that kind of thought process. You end up in that kind of position. And I'm just so ashamed and sorry that this is happening in Tauranga.
How do you think this reflects on Aotearoa right now and people's thinking? A, turning up in a costume from the KKK, and B, nobody saying, hey, I think you should leave or take that off?
Oh, it puts us in a very poor light, Lisa, and I'm sure this is going to be picked up by the media and spread far and wide, and I am really ashamed that that's happening. But, on the other hand, it is a reflection of the way certain segments of our community are going. I'm thinking of the anti-co-governance movement run by people like Julian Batchelor. End of the day, that is their mantra as well. Three Waters even, the protests against that, all those things kind of add up to an unfortunate trend, I think, in some parts of the country.
The committee that organised this event says it's sorry in retrospect that it didn't take action on the night. What would you say to people who see something like this and sometimes it's an inclination to not get involved? What would you do?
I can understand the reluctance to get involved, but for heaven's sake, if we're going to live in a country where the ability to relate to each other in a way that is not offensive, you've just got to stand up and call this stuff out, step it out. Otherwise, that people feel that they can do this, it's okay, and we can say we're sorry later, but we still did it.
Kia ora rā e ho, thank you for your time. That is Buddy Makaere, who is a former director of the Waitangi Tribunal and a tauranga historian and iwi leader. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that one. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It is 12 minutes away from 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Locals call it a forgotten highway, and last night they got a reminder why fallen trees and debris came washing down in a raging torrent on State Highway 35 around the Raukumara Peninsula just east of Opotiki. Crews have spent the hours since trying to clear the road and reopen it so people can access main centres for the doctor and supermarket. One lane has now reopened and traffic control is in place. Finn Blackwell has more.
Locals say they're used to having slash come down in the area, but the fallout caused by closing State Highway 35 from Beach Road to the Motu River Bridge has been felt around the region. Lisa Wharipapa works at the Te Kaha Beach Hotel around 70 kilometres east of Opotiki and says the closure meant her guests had to delay important plans.
It's just sad for the whānaus. They've got medical appointments they need to attend. Whānau need to access food and all the other services available to them that they aren't able to use at the moment.
She says someone needs to take responsibility for the mess.
It's a topic beyond me and beyond us, and I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. Someone needs to be held accountable.
Ms Wharipapa says the community has experience in these sorts of situations.
We're all resilient in terms of this. We kind of just have to ride the wave and wait. Being along the coast, we are prepared for these natural disasters, I should say. It's not something that we sit here and wait for, but we are ready and we are prepared.
10 minutes up the highway in Te Kaha, Coastal Hideaway manager Craig Morris says he had to spend the morning ringing guests to tell them the bad news.
You got people booked in, it's, you got to chase them up and tell them what the situation is and try and find alternative solutions for them, so that they can, fulfill our commitments as a accommodation provider.
He says slash in the area is an ongoing issue.
I think this is a problem that's in this particular area in the East Cape, and not just us, but further around towards Gisborne as well. It's a problem that's not going to go away. So, there needs to be some solution found, or some sort of remediation, or whatever. But it's certainly ongoing.
Opotiki councillor Max Camera says the road is in need of attention.
Down our way, our State Highway 35 is nicknamed as the Forgotten Highway because we always feel that we are forgotten, and so this just highlights it.
He says communities on the coast rely on the connection for their everyday needs.
Any road closure like this or blockage like this is always significant for us on the coast. For our people there, we're really reliant on getting into Opotiki or Whakatane to do our shopping. It's the closest supermarkets to us, so for some people on the coast, it's like a 5-hour round trip.
Waka Kotahi says it knows State Highway 35 is an important connection for businesses and residents.
Planning on parking in Auckland City? Well, as it stands, it will set you back up to $5 an hour in the CBD, increasing to $10 if you stay longer than 2 hours. And next week, Auckland Transport is increasing the cost of street parking by $1 an hour across the entire region. AT says some of the revenue from those extra dollars will go towards running Auckland's public transport network. But will it be enough to get people out of their cars? Reporter Tom Taylor asked Aucklanders what they make of the price hike.
No, increase, no. Decrease, it should be decreased. To be honest, I don't really park in the city much. I use public transport. It doesn't really have too much impact on me. I would say it's expensive, still better than Sydney, probably.
I don't mind, as long as the dollar's going to is going to be used efficiently.
Well, I don't drive, so it doesn't really affect me. It might encourage some people to take public transport. Another dollar? That's kind of tough because I already know people that is having difficulties, having problems going to their office and finding parking spots.
I actually think it's quite a good idea. I think the kind of more incentive you can get to put people on public transport, the better.
Most people I speak to, they prefer to park out of the city if they're either from out of town or just visitors. Too damn expensive.
What's the absolute limit that you'd pay?
Maybe $3, yeah. Because the public transport is also $4.50 and So what is the point?
Per hour, I wouldn't want to pay more than a couple of dollars per hour, I would think.
No, I used to just not pay and risk getting a ticket because you're more likely to spend more if you pay every day rather than risk getting a $40 ticket.
Yeah. So do you think the dollar increase will be enough to push people out of their cars?
I don't think so. I think make the public transport free, get more trains, get more of that stuff, and then people will get out of their cars.
Presumably the whole idea about this is to not eliminate, but to reduce the amount of private cars in the public centre, which is fine as long as it's done in conjunction with an appropriate alternative.
I know it's kind of tough on retailers and things like that, but sometimes you need a little bit of stick to get people to change their behaviour. Maybe they should make sure the price of public transport comes down at the same time.
A new charitable centre to help disabled children develop has opened its doors in Palmerston North. Little Stars is the brainchild of a family who know only too well what access to therapy at an early age can do. Our reporter Jimmy Allingham paid a visit.
The wheels on the bus go.
2-year-old Julia Tiffin has cerebral palsy and survived a severe brain bleed when she was born. Shortly after her birth, her parents were asked if they wanted to redirect care. In other words, let her die. Now she's said her first word and has started crawling, as her mum Nikita describes during a therapy session at the Little Stars Centre.
It's basically taken about 2 years to get her to be able to move on her own. At the start of this year, she was still just sitting and she couldn't even pivot or move. And then about 5 months later, maybe April, May, she started to actually crawl and pivot, and it's opened up her world immensely.
Nikita Tiffin says Julia's development is down to the regular therapy she receives, something not every child in her situation gets.
She's super mobile at the moment. We're currently working on balancing and standing and hopefully walking. But it's a long program. I do think about the kids that miss out because she's had so much and it's still taken us so long to get here. And so the kids that don't get anything till 5, it's just, devastating.
But all the therapy didn't come easily. Mrs. Tiffin and her advocate Jane Carrigan had to fight for it. Ms Carrigan says without help early, children with disabilities are sometimes left to languish, unlike Julia.
What we're seeing here is the difference between early intervention and
no intervention until they go to school. That is most kids in New Zealand. So I have a little one up in Auckland who born in exactly the same circumstances. Family completely unsupported until ACC finally came to the party when he was 4 years old. That little kid is a million miles behind Julia.
The Planet Ryan Family Foundation is behind the centre, a charity started by Julia Tiffin's grandparents, Pip and Jules Cook, whose son, Ryan, lives with severe disabilities. Little Stars operates out of a conversion warehouse in Palmerston North's industrial zone. Inside, it's a colourful array of equipment and space for therapy, as Mrs Cook explains.
What we wanted to do was make sure our granddaughter did not have the same challenges that we had, and then also make that available to other families as well as supporting families, because it's incredibly isolating bringing up a child with challenges.
So far, about 14 families use the centre without it even advertising. Its founders describe it as providing a unique model for disability care and support for children and their families who are isolated in the community in the absence of such services. It's hoped they can progress, like Julia Tiffin.
It's all that really persistent integrated therapy that starts to click and it starts to work, and that early intervention. And that is what most of us that have children coming into adulthood that have, severe disabilities physically have missed out on.
On the day RNZ visits, Little Star's lead therapist, Heather Last, is working with Julia to increase her movement.
She climbed up on the little plinth there, so she had to stand up, she had to get one knee right up on the plinth, and then she had to pull her body up. We did a lot of playing with her feet because she's got restricted movements in her feet, so we did that, and we did a lot of weight bearing on her left hand and going over to the left side.
For children like Julia, that's the sort of thing they need, as often as possible.
When you have cerebral palsy, it's a developing disability, really. It's never the same. And if you learn to walk or move, I should say move in a certain ways, and that gets really established, the brain thinks that's the typical normal way of doing it. But if you get in early and teach the more corrected way, then that's what the brain learns.
Little Stars has received a $60,000 community grant, enough to cover the rent for the first year. It's also received plenty of donations, from equipment to signage, and people to keep it running.
Good girl, Missy Moo.
And to some of your feedback before the news at 6 on National's health policy. This is cancer care. They're pledging to introduce 13 new cancer treatments. Mixed response. Jill's got in touch to say, I'm not a National voter, but Dr. Letty spoke very well. National need many more like him. Sue, on the other hand, says there are a lot of low-income people with no community services card for whom the removal of prescription charges has really helped. National saying it would fund the $70 million a year for these new cancer treatments by targeting free prescriptions. If you have a community services card or a gold card, you still get them free. Others would have to pay the $5. On the subject of doctors voting to strike, this listener says disgusting, particularly given that the average doctor's income is very respectable. There is a shortage, however. Remember, it is their own profession, colleges and medical council that controls and restricts the qualified people entering to practice. Another says, good on doctors. I support them 100%. Just a shame registered nurses didn't vote to do the same. And this listener says the government has chosen not to reform the tax system in order to properly fund our health system. This strike is about protection of our public health system as we are currently bleeding out to Australia. Another in the same vein, the healthcare system is in a dire state. Senior doctors are desperate to communicate to their employer that they are absolutely at the end of their tether, propping up the shell of what was once a world-leading healthcare system.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. Senior doctors and dentists working in hospitals say they are at the end of their tether and set to strike over deadlocked pay talks. The Association of Salaried Medical Specialists says more than 80% of its members have voted for 3 strikes next month. Executive Director Sarah Dalton told Checkpoint they are claiming a 6 to 8% pay rise in line with inflation.
Senior doctors and dentists have had year-on-year real pay cuts since 2020, and we have massive recruitment and retention issues. We import nearly 50% of our senior medical and dental workforce, and people are voting with their feet and not coming to New Zealand anymore.
Sarah Dalton says she's sorry the strikes are likely to affect tens of thousands of non-urgent surgeries and procedures. Labor leader Chris Hipkins says more cancer treatments shouldn't come at the expense of universal free pharmacy prescriptions. National wants to fund 13 cancer treatments by limiting free pharmacy scripts to only those on low incomes and superannuitants. Party leader Christopher Luxon says those who can pay a $5 script fee should, so the money can be put to better use. Chris Hipkins says it's not an either-or situation.
It's another smoke and mirrors policy from the National Party. They want to take medicine off one group of New Zealanders in order to give it to another group of New Zealanders. In fact, we need to be increasing the Pharmac budget, but that shouldn't come at the expense of free prescriptions.
Chris Hipkins says Labor would continue to increase funding for Pharmac, an agency whose job it is to get the best value for money on medications. The levels of nicotine in vapes will be reduced as part of the government's attempts to curb youth vaping. The government has confirmed it'll limit the concentration in single-use vapes to 20 milligrams of nicotine per millilitre. Currently, single-use vapes can have concentrations as high as 50 milligrams of nicotine. In reusable vaping products, the maximum nicotine salt concentration has been set at 28.5 milligrams per millilitre. The Health Minister, Dr Aisha Verrall, says the levels will balance the need for vapes to be an effective smoking cessation device while also limiting the risk of nicotine addiction. Disgraced philanthropist James Wallace has been stripped of his knighthood. Wallace was named in June as the prominent businessman who was jailed for sexually abusing 3 young men. The government says he is no longer a knight. James Wallace can no longer use the title Sir or KNZM and has been asked to return his warrant of appointment and honours insignia. A quiz team that dressed like members of the murderous white American extremist group the Ku Klux Klan has apologised to event organisers for its poor judgment in perpetuating racism and reinforcing harmful stereotypes. The team dressed in the distinctive KKK-like robes and hoods and turned up at Saturday's event organised by the Kaimai Settlers Committee in the small Bay of Plenty town. The organisers say they deplore the behaviour of the team and regret not asking them to remove their costumes or leave. Tropical storm Hillary has reached southern California, where at least 9 million people are under flash flood warnings as it drives torrential rain across the region. At a press briefing, the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, said the city is prepared.
No matter what, we will be ready. Our message today remains the same: stay safe, stay informed, and stay home.
And winds across southern California are expected to reach 120 kilometres an hour. Left-wing candidate Luisa Gonzalez has won the first round of the Ecuadorian elections with just over 33% of the vote. Her closest rival came in second with 24%. The BBC's Katie Watson reports.
Luisa Gonzalez, a protégé of former leader Rafael Correa, was the firm favourite to win this round. Her promises of a return of generous social programmes appeal to Ecuadorians hit hard by economic crisis. But Ecuadorians are divided politically. Correa still looms large here. He cut poverty while in power, but was then mired in corruption scandals and is now in exile in Belgium. Those who want an end to his influence in this country will back pro-business candidate Daniel Noboa. The only thing that unites Ecuadorians is their need for peace and security in a country that's been hit by growing violence from drug cartels.
And in news just ahead, support for Labor has crashed into the 20s, according to the latest political poll. The One News Varian survey shows the party has dropped 4 points to 29%. National is up 2 points to 37%, while ACT is up 1 on 13%. Those numbers would give the right bloc 65 seats in Parliament, enough to comfortably form a government. Southland protesters who chain themselves to historic trees have been unable to save them from the chopping block. The group of Lawson cypress trees were planted on the grounds of the Presbyterian Church in the late 1800s. They were earmarked to be cut down last year to make way for a new church, prompting protests. Lumsden Tree Lovers member Kim Spencer MacDonald says protesters were told they'd be arrested for trespassing if they remained chained.
Makes me really sad
I think it's just so short-sighted, and especially at this time of the year. It's spring, so as well, one of the ladies is from England, and she said there's just no way that trees would also even be chopped down at this time of the year with all the birds nesting and bits and pieces like that.
And one tree has been felled and another has lost its limbs. And that's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, a report suggests not all the extensive damage in Marlborough last year was weather-related. What impact could that have on the rebuild? Silicon Valley veteran Jerry Kaplan on the rise of driverless cars. Are they safe? Freediver Sashiko Fukimoto's deep connection to the ocean and the role it played in her pregnancy and birthing choices. And fly fishing fans, Grant Henderson's new book on the history of the country's finest rainbow trout river, the Tongariro. With me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, including the Coromandel. Showers, some heavy with hail, clearing this evening. Fine tomorrow. Southwest gales easing this evening. Waitomo to Manawatu, also Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Showers, some heavy with hail in the west. Showers becoming isolated this evening and clearing north of Taihape. Becoming fine tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, including Hortowhenua to Wellington. Showers, some heavy with hail. Showers about the east coast, but fine elsewhere tomorrow. Southerly gales in exposed places, easing tomorrow. Marlborough, excluding the Kaikoura coast. Nelson and Buller to Fiordland, mainly fine. Cloud and drizzle developing in Fiordland tomorrow evening. The Kaikoura coast and Canterbury, fine apart from some isolated showers north of Christchurch. Otago and Southland, a few showers becoming fine this evening. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional rain. RNZ National, it is 6:07 in your Checkpoint and Lisa Owen.
Nā mihi Anna, no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. National and ACT can comfortably form a government according to the latest One News Varian poll. Labour, on the other hand, has taken a big hit, falling into the 20s in the poll, sitting at 29%. It's a 4-point drop for the governing party. National is on 37, up 2. ACT is on 13. The Greens have picked up some Labour support and are on 12%, up 2. New Zealand First is on 4%, just outside the 5% it needs to return to Parliament. Te Pāti Māori is on 3%. As for preferred Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins remains in the lead, but only just. He is on 21, down 3. Christopher Luxon is nipping at his heels on 20. Our political reporter Katie Scotcher joins us now. Well, this is a bit of a shocker for Labour, isn't it, Katie?
Yeah, this will be a devastating result for Labour, crashing into the 20s. A quick run through of those numbers again in the One News Varian poll. National is up 2 points on 37%. Labour has dropped 4 points to 29%. That's the party's lowest result in this poll in 6 years. ACT is on 13%, up 1 point. The Greens are on 12%, up 2 points. New Zealand First up 1.4%, so just shy of that 5% threshold needed to enter Parliament. And Te Pāti Māori is on 3%, and that result is steady. Now, with those results, National would get 48 seats and ACT would get 17 seats, giving the Right Bloc 65 seats in Parliament. That means National and ACT could comfortably form a government on those numbers. The Left Bloc, however, Labour is on 37 seats. The Greens get 15. Te Pāti Māori get 3 seats. Wharawiri Waititi manages to secure Wairiki. That gives the Left Bloc 55 seats, 6 short of the 61 needed to form a government.
Katie, where does this leave Chris Hipkins? He is hovering in the high 20s, but Andrew Little lost his job at, I think, from memory, about 24% in the polls. And we're also looking at a virtual neck-and-neck situation with the preferred Prime Minister stakes.
Yeah, well, Labour's in an interesting situation here. The party chose Chris Hipkins as its new leader when Jacinda Ardern stepped down at the start of the year. And the other names that were floated around at the time, Kitty Allen, Michael Wood, both of those MPs, Kitty Allen's leaving politics and Michael Wood has been banished to the backbenches over his shares shambles. The party's been bogged down in distractions most of the year, so they wouldn't really talking about potential leadership changes or any of those sort of conversations. The party would be looking to avoid those to try and convince voters that it is a stable option come election day.
I'm not sure of the polling period for this, Katie, but I'm just wondering, were there any particular policy releases or incidents during the time that people were being asked who that they would vote for?
Yeah, so this is really interesting. So the polling period was August 12th to August 16th, that's last week. Now, in that period, the Labour Party really kind of ramped up its campaign mode. It really shifted from governing to entering the campaign. It confirmed that it would remove GST off fresh fruit and vegetables and frozen fruit and vegetables. It extended the paid parental leave, and it also removed the last of the COVID restrictions. Obviously, the Labour government did that. Particularly with the removing the GST, that's a really popular policy, and I think the party will be disappointed that it hasn't been rewarded in the polls for those policies.
And interesting, looking at their numbers, Labour is down 4%. Their companions in a coalition, their major party, the Greens, is only up 2%. What do we think is happening with the rest of the voters? Where are they going?
Well, this has been, particularly with the One News Varian poll and the last results that we got in July, the National and Labour, the collective vote with the purple vote was actually at the lowest that it had been, I think, in a couple of decades, and we haven't necessarily seen the same result this time. The Greens will probably be happy with this result regardless. The votes have kind of shifted possibly more towards New Zealand First has managed to pick up 1 point to 4%, so it's possible some of the voters are shifting over to Winston Peters. ACT is up 1 point, and the undecided voters numbers I think is at 12%, and that is steady, so that hasn't changed. So the support leaving Labour has kind of shifted to between ACT, Greens and New Zealand First.
And so we talked about what Labour was up to. This is potentially Christopher Luxon's best showing and the National Party's best showing. What were they doing or not doing? Is this a case of Labour losing it rather than them winning it?
Well, last week, in terms of the National Party, it was relatively quiet when it comes to releasing policy. A lot of the focus was on Labour, and National was very vocal in its criticism of the GST policy. There's been lots of talk of fiscal holes, and so it's possible that those attacks that National has been making on or against Labour have been setting in among voters, and they've maybe been able to convince voters of their criticism. Yeah, so last week wasn't necessarily a busy week in terms of policy from National, and that may have, in terms of criticising Labour, may have paid off.
Thank you for that, Katie. That is Katie Scotcher, our political reporter there. If you're just joining us, that's the latest One News Varian poll. Shows National is up 2 points. ACT is also up. They could comfortably form a government with 65 seats. And Chris Hipkins and Christopher Luxon are practically neck and neck, only 1%, I think it is, or thereabouts between them for the preferred Prime Minister stakes. Very close indeed. OK, let's move on. The relationship between Auckland Transport and the ferry operator Fuller's has hit very choppy waters over the cancellation of multiple Auckland commuter services. From October, Fuller's 360 will not run the Birkenhead, Te Anua, Northcote, Point and Bayswater services, leaving AT scrambling to find a replacement operator. And there'll also be significant cuts to the timetable on the Gulf Harbour and Half Moon Bay routes. Auckland Transport says Fuller's has quit the routes so it can accelerate its training program, with the company short of about 12 crews. But Fuller's CEO, Mike Horn, insists AT has known for months that this was coming.
No, we didn't quit. We certainly came to the end of the contract. If we'd had the ability to keep extending for another 2 years, Lisa, that would have been ideal for everybody, but they're quite aware that we were unable to.
Because of staff shortages, Mike? Because of staff shortages?
That's the fundamental reason, yes. And This has been something that we've been clearly talking even with yourself about for the last 12 months. And this goes right back to discussions at a government level. If you recall, we were talking to Michael Wood about this. So
yes, and I do understand that.
Auckland Transport, yeah.
But perhaps in just this short time you have highlighted potentially what is a major issue here. Auckland Transport and Fuller's doesn't seem to be on the same page, and the person missing out is the person standing at the wharf waiting to get a ferry ride. Why can't you guys get it together?
Look, we've been working really hard on this, and there's a lot of progress that's been made. I think I said to you in the last chat that we had this industry issue is not a short-term fix. So we've got lots and lots of people at the entry level. We're fully staffed, and we have progressed or signed off, depending which terminology you want, 550 people in the last 7 months. What we need to do to get everything back up and running is sign off 2,000 people across the same length of time. And this is all about training and skills. So the accelerated program that Auckland Transport and ourselves are now working together on, which is really important, allows us to get back to that point. The other thing is it's always been about immigration as well, and getting short-term, very skilled people in as quickly as we can. So there's 3 or 4 of them we've got in recently, but there's a long way to go with that as well.
It's no surprise that you're down, crew, right? When we spoke to you in March, you said you were 50 people down. That didn't happen overnight. So where was your staff succession planning? Where was your retention planning? I mean, how did you end up in what is a crisis situation?
Look, there were literally a lot of people that left and made different choices over COVID, and the reality is it's crew with 7 to 10 years experience, not 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. And so we have literally been working really hard on this for 18 months. We've worked through the immigration side of things. We're working through the wage increase to be internationally competitive, and we're working through the accelerated training piece as well, which, to be fair, we would have liked to have started 6 months ago, but simply were unable to.
Okay, the other thing that you have said to me in the past is the immigration settings, right? You needed to bring people in from overseas. Well, the government did adjust their immigration settings in your favour for ships masters and deckhands. And deckhands. So, again, why haven't you managed to recruit more people?
So no, that was a really good win. We're really pleased with that. So it got them on the green list, and we've brought in probably 3 or 4 skippers from South Africa. What the issue is that it's still around visa processing time, particularly with families. So those settings, apart from being on the green list, the rest of it actually hasn't changed. So we caught up with all of the processing. Then the other part, which I think I spoke about at the time, is the qualifications from overseas do not match the qualifications in New Zealand. So there's another delay around that as we have to work through individually those qualifications. Third part is around the how competitive we are with rates, and I think I said at the time we're 25% under what you'd get in Australia. So that is the third part that we're still working with government as to how we resolve that.
So what, you want them to top up that money?
For contracted services, absolutely. For commercial services, we pick that up ourselves. So that's a big increase, and that's what we're strongly advocating and working towards.
So if you want the government to kick in on those subsidised services, how much more would you be expecting from government?
We think what we need to be competitive internationally, and this is for the industry, is somewhere between 20 and 25% for skilled mariners.
But what is that as a number, Mike? As real cash monies, how much is that?
That would add another $30 an hour.
Add $30 an hour to what?
Yeah. Well, actually, so if we think about a skipper, it moves you to about $140,000 a year.
Okay. The other thing is, in March, you told me that if the government loosened immigration regulations, the Coromandel could have its ferry service back. It did loosen immigration settings, and Coromandel has just been advised it's not getting a ferry service back from you. Why is that?
Yeah, so again, we just don't have the people to allow us to do that. So it's Coromandel, it's also Rotorua through summertime, it's any of the charter work that we're doing. And it's all of the destinational tourist stuff. So where we're doing accelerated training at the moment, that's to get contracted services with AT back to where they need to be. I have a whole lot more work to do around destination to get those ones back as well. So
do you feel that you've misled those communities?
Not at all. Not at all. We're working really, really hard to get those back. But, I also told you at the time that it's not for skilled and I'm talking 7 to 10 years, it's a long burn in terms of getting what we need into the country and training people up. So
Mike,
this is not just a Fuller's issue. This is an industry issue.
Okay, so you mentioned 7 to 10 years, right? Is that how long people have to wait for a decent ferry service? 7 to 10 years?
No, that's what I'm saying a skilled mariner is. So remember that we're accelerating training. We're trying to bring more people in internationally as well. We're progressing our deckhands to skippers, and we're progressing our small boat skippers to large boat skippers. So no, they don't have to wait 7 to 10 years.
What would you say to people who think that Fuller's has delivered a substandard service and is continuing to let customers down with these moves?
Oh, look, Lisa, I fundamentally disagree with that. We've worked incredibly hard in that space. We have great people. We have very professional people. And I challenge anyone to look at who else is doing it better than we are in New Zealand at this point. We're working really hard.
And that is Mike Horn from Fuller's 360 there. 22 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. More than 9 million people are under flash flood warnings as Tropical Storm Hilary moves across Southern California. It is the state's first tropical storm in 84 years and has already been described as an unprecedented weather event by the Los Angeles mayor. A year's rainfall is expected in a 24-hour period. The Governor of California, Gavin Newsom, says the state has deployed 7,500 personnel to respond to the storm, and he has a warning for those wanting to venture outside.
I left from Palm Springs at City Hall, meeting with the mayor and others. They wanted a drop in the sky, coming from the sky. Soon as we got up to San Bernardino, they reported flooding at that same site and the most significant rainfall over a 60-minute period anytime in the history of Palm Springs. That's how quickly the system is moving. Take nothing for granted. If you think, boy, the skies are clear and I can go out on a long jog or walk, just be cautious. Wait till this time tomorrow night.
Nevada's governor has also declared a state of emergency. Local police in Palm Springs say there have been at least 3 swift water rescues so far. For the latest, here's CNN's Josh Campbell from San Bernardino.
A major focus of concern for authorities here in Southern California is where we're standing. We're at the base of the San Bernardino Mountains, and this area now under mandatory evacuation. The sign here over my shoulder tells the whole story. You can see on that sign, mud and debris flows possible, and that is because this area was recently subjected to major wildfire burns, that causing this scarring that you can see. This is part of this creek bed here, but this type of scarring fire all over this region. The reason why this is so concerning is because this, once the water starts flowing here, potential flash floods, that just unleashes the ability for that water to flow rapidly without any type of obstruction. Now, we heard throughout the day from fire department officials, including from the battalion chief in San Bernardino, who talked about why this area is of such great concern and why it's so unpredictable about where this flooding will go.
The biggest areas of concerns for us is some of our burn scar areas, the El Dorado and the Apple Fire that are burned a few years ago. And really, we've seen pretty significant mud flow and water flow in this last year, which was pretty good. If we ask you to evacuate, we don't take that lightly. We're asking you based on predictions and concerns, and we want you to get out sooner rather than later. The last thing we want you to do if we have significant rain is you try to leave last minute and then be overtaken by floodwaters.
Now, for fire officials in San Bernardino County, it is very much all hands on deck. That is because officials here have some 20,000 square miles that they cover. This is the largest, geographically speaking, county in the United States. And so fire officials are on alert. They've been preparing for this storm for days. We're told they've now moved from prepared mode to response mode, waiting to see just where this flooding will actually take place.
There's been jubilation on the streets of Spain as football fans celebrated their team's victory in the final of the Women's World Cup in Australia. They beat England 1-0 in a closely fought final in Sydney to win the trophy for the first time. Here's the BBC's Jenny Hill from Madrid.
They dared to hope, and they got their dream. History made, and a moment to savour. We've won at last, he says.
Historia!
Her words, history, history, finally.
Well, you can see just how thrilled they are. You know, there are so many young people here, and for many, this is a moment which they'll remember for, well, the rest of their lives.
Even the Queen of Spain couldn't contain her excitement, celebrating with the squad. Their victory all the sweeter after months of a very public falling out between coach and players. And back home, this win matters. Spain's football mad, but the men tend to steal the show. The women are as good as the men, this fan told us. They make the same effort. We should give them more support. They give us the same joy.
It's a beginning that we are winning. More people is interested.
Today is the day that women can finally get the spot that they deserve.
Revelling in their triumph and hoping the spoils of victory extend far beyond the pitch.
A Ferrari racing car from 1954 has sold at auction in California for nearly $2 million. Doesn't sound too unusual, does it? Until you learn that it's a burnt-out, rusty, twisted shell which only looks fit for the scrap heap. So why has someone paid so much for a car wreck? The BBC's Harry Bly explains.
A 1954 Ferrari 500 Mondial Spider Series 1, despite having had an estimate selling price of between $1.2 and $1.6 million, looks like it's just been pulled out of a scrapyard. There are no wheels, no instruments, no seats, but it does have a gearbox and its original 3-litre inline-4 engine. Of course, those don't work. This model won the World Championships twice in the 1950s, giving its name Mondial. This particular car was shipped to the United States in 1958, and not long after, it was involved in a serious crash. The wreckage was salvaged and bought by a Ferrari collector named Walter Medlin in 1978, where it went into storage. And that brings us to the present day, where it and 19 other vintage Ferraris were being sold in what was called the Lost and Found collection by the auction house RM Sotheby's. The car exceeded its estimate, selling for $1.8 million, which might seem a lot, but working models of this rare racing car have in the past gone for as much as $5 million.
Wow, that is hard to get your head around. Other things that you're struggling to get your head around, someone has got in touch about Labor's education policy that it announced today, saying, isn't this what National proposed and was roundly condemned by Labor for it, or am I just confused? On the subject of the National Party's health policy, funding 13 new cancer treatments by limiting free prescriptions to people with community services cards and pensioners rather than across the board. Chris from Christchurch says National Party health policies beg a belief. There are many in the community who are vulnerable with their health and don't either hold a community services card. Increase burdens on health sector by slapping prescription fees back on, that person says. A lot of you have got in touch about supermarket crime. Interesting take you have. This person says, why not invest $45 million in lower prices and remove the need for stealing? Another says, what are they doing to make food, at least bread and milk, more affordable for the poor, other than an exciting smart trolley system? Supermarkets are price gouging, says this person. They are talking about making an honest day's wage. Wah, wah, wah. That's what they said, not what I said. Now, if you missed anything from the program, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi popo, and tomorrow from 5 a.m, First Up talks polls and policies with Nationals Deputy Leader Nicola Willis. Get your coffee and tune in 5 a.m. You won't want to miss that. Kaua e wariwari te atatero e a mātou kōrero. Don't forget, we've got heaps of great stories and videos on our webpage. Check it out.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Support for Labor has crashed 4 points to 29%, according to the latest political poll. The One News Varian survey gives National and ACT 65 seats in Parliament, comfortably enough for a government. Labor says it will direct teachers on reading, writing and maths lessons from 2026 if returned to power. Teachers and schools would face sanctions if they don't use government-approved approaches to lessons. Senior hospital doctors and dentists will walk out for 2 hours on September the 5th and the 13th and 4 hours